Thole, and I'm excited to be back for a new episode of Ripple Effect. Since it is October and Halloween is nearly here, I thought we would dive into a staple of the spooky season, horror and thriller TV and film, to discuss copyright, what it protects, and what copyright doesn't protect. While the connection between horror and thrillers and copyright might not be readily apparent at first, it's actually what people love about horror and thriller films that make them such a good vehicle to talk about copyright protection. Horror and thriller films and TV blend the new and the old. New characters, new eerie music in the background, new jump scares, and they combine it with the old, whether that is old tropes or old elements from ghost stories and folklore that in some cases are decades or even hundreds of years old. It's precisely this combination of the new and the old that can make horror and thriller films and TV so intriguing, but what also makes them a potential lightning rod for copyright disputes. A recent breakout thriller from Showtime, Yellowjackets, was actually subject to a copyright infringement lawsuit for just this reason. Yellowjackets is a TV series that follows two timelines. One in the 90s after the immediate aftermath of a plane crash of a team of high school girls on their way to a national soccer championship, and a current timeline with those members of the soccer team now grown up and having to reface the events from the 90s. Eden Film Productions sued, alleging that Yellowjackets was an infringement of Eden Films' 2015 film, Eden, which followed the story of a team of male soccer players stranded on an island after a plane crash. The case was quickly dismissed by the judge reviewing the case. While the judge noted that there were some elements that were possibly similar, such as the survivors including children of a coach for the soccer team, many of the other elements were not protected by copyright. So before delving into what was and was not protected in the Yellowjackets lawsuit, I wanted to briefly mention what copyright does cover. Copyright protects original works of authorship. The key there is original. Things that are new and creative are protected by copyright. And this is exactly what the judge in the Yellowjackets case emphasized in their decision to dismiss the case. The judge explained that not every element of a work may be protected, saying that originality remains the cornerstone of copyright protection. The judge also explained that copyright protection only extends to those components of a work that are original to the author. In other words, copyright not only protects the original elements of a work, but this can be analyzed on an element-by-element basis for a work that is particularly complex. Something like a horror film or TV show that combines multiple elements like cinematography, script, music, and performances by actors. In the case of the Eden Films and Yellowjackets suit, the judge ultimately found that there was no copyright infringement because so many of the elements that Eden Films alleged were copied were actually very common elements, tropes, or sometimes what's referred to as scenes of fare in the thriller or survival genre. Eden Film alleged that things like the survivors trying to escape back to civilization and growing dissent in the groups of survivors were copied between Yellowjackets and Eden. The judge pointed out that survivors trying to escape an island is a key feature of any survival story, going back thousands of years to Odysseus, but also including examples like Robinson Crusoe and even Gilligan trying to leave his island. Because these elements were common tropes or themes within the specific subset of survival stories, the judge ruled that there was not copyright infringement because these were not original works. So while copyright protection protects original works, it does not protect things that are common or already existing. In addition to the examples we just discussed, another key exception to copyright protection is public domain. Public domain refers generally to things that are not subject to copyright protection. They're in the domain for the public to generally use. There are a lot of reasons why things might enter the public domain, but one of the key ones is that the length of the copyright runs out. Copyright protection is only given for a set number of years. While the length of a copyright varies based on a number of factors, like the Copyright Act that was in place when the work was originally created and the type of work, a good key rule is that anything created before 1923 in the United States is in the public domain. This comes up frequently in the horror and thriller genre because there are many old stories that are frequently being recreated. For example, the works of Edgar Allan Poe are often recreated, and I believe there was a Netflix series within the last couple of years specifically related to some of Poe's stories. Another example would be Washington Irving's Sleepy Hollow. In the early 2000s, Tim Burton recreated the story into the film Sleepy Hollow, and that was a protectable work of authorship to the extent that it created new characters, had script, cinematography, music, and character development that was unique. Notably, Tim Burton couldn't claim exclusive rights to the underlying story of Sleepy Hollow because it was in the public domain, meaning that other people could potentially also make their own adaptations, whether in film or in other media. In mentioning works that are in the public domain and that have been recently recreated into new films that have protectable, original, copyrightable elements, I wanted to mention the story of Bram Stoker's Dracula and Nosferatu because it's a great example of how copyright can become complicated really quickly. Many of you may be familiar with Nosferatu because a 2024 film was released in black and white and brought to wide critical praise. However, there was an original 1922 Nosferatu that was almost completely destroyed, in part due to copyright issues. When the 1922 film Nosferatu was originally being created, Bram Stoker's Dracula wasn't so old, and in fact was still subject to copyright protection in Germany. Although the producer of the Nosferatu film argued that there were differences, such as the difference in the name of the vampire being Count Orlok versus Dracula, and therefore wasn't a copyright infringement, the judge in that case found that Nosferatu was a copyright infringement in Germany. As part of the order, the judge ordered all of the copies of the film to be destroyed. Requiring the film copies to be destroyed essentially meant that the film was erased. However, there were a very few number of the film reels that made it out of Germany. One of those made it to the United States. Because there wasn't any copyright reciprocity at the time and some technical issues related to copyright notice, Bram Stoker's Dracula was not subject to copyright protection in the US at the time, meaning that it would be difficult to argue that the film reel in the US should also be destroyed to comply with the German order for copyright infringement. In part because of this elusive backstory of how a film was almost completely eviscerated except for this one film, as well as the film itself being a work of art, it became quickly popular in Hollywood circles and a quick classic for those who loved thrillers and horror movies. This one single film reel led to an appreciation not only of the film, but vampire tropes in the horror genre, which led to a slew of vampire movies, last but certainly not least, to include the 2024 adaptation of Nosferatu. I hope this has been an interesting look into what is and is not protected by copyright, and something that you might think about next time you're watching a horror film. However, even if you're not creating the screenplay for the next great thriller, understanding what is and isn't protected by copyright is important for businesses as well as creatives. If you're a business and you're creating any sort of new original content, whether that's websites, designs, manuals, or campaigns, you're creating original works and you're in the business of storytelling. For both creators and businesses, understanding what's protected and what isn't under copyright can help you implement strategies for protecting